It was a cold and quiet night. The streets were nearly empty. Most people were asleep in their homes, wrapped in blankets. But not her. She had nowhere to go, and the night felt colder than usual. An old black woman, tired and worn, slowly walked down the side of the road. Her coat was thin, her shoes were old, her back was slightly bent. She walked slowly, her hands trembling. She didn't complain. She didn't look around. She just kept walking. Her name was Mrs. Louise Carter. She was 73 years old. She hadn't slept properly in 2 nights. She had been traveling from one town to another, trying to get to her son. Her phone had died hours ago, and she didn't have a charger. All she needed now was to make one call. Ahead, she saw the glowing lights of a gas station. It looked quiet. There were no customers inside, only one tired worker behind the counter reading a magazine. Outside, 2 police officers sat in their patrol car, sipping coffee and watching the parking lot like it was their personal stage. Louise walked toward the gas station, limping, just slightly. Her knees were sore and her legs felt heavy, but she made it to the door and slowly stepped. Inside, the worker looked up briefly, then back down at his magazine. Louise gently walked up to the counter. "Excuse me, son," she said in a soft, respectful voice. "May I please use your phone? Just for a quick call?" The young man looked at her without smiling. He was barely out of his teens.
"We don't
give out our phone," he muttered, not even meeting her eyes. Louise nodded slowly. "It's just one call," she said. "My son. He's waiting for me." The worker shrugged. "Company rules, ma'am," she sighed. "All right. Thank you." Anyway, she stepped back outside, disappointed. She looked around and noticed the 2 officers in the car watching her closely. One of them, a tall white officer named Officer Jake, nudged his partner. "Hey, look at that," he said, pointing. "She looks like she's been living under a bridge." His partner, Officer Cole, chuckled. "Think she's drunk? Or just crazy?" "Either way," Jake said, opening his door. "Let's check on her, make sure she's not bothering the store." They both stepped out of the car and walked toward her. Louise stood near the side of the gas station building now. She was looking at a map on the wall, trying to figure out how far the nearest bus station was. The officers approached. "Hey there," Ma'am Jake said with a fake smile. "You lost?" Louise turned and gave them a polite nod. "Good evening, officers. I'm just trying to find a place to make a phone call. My phone battery died." Cole snorted. "Yeah, what's the emergency?" "It's no emergency," she said. Softly, "Just need to call my son. He's waiting for me." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Your son, huh? He gonna come save you in his little toy car?" Cole laughed again. Louise didn't react. She just looked at them with the same calm face. Jake stepped closer. "Look, this isn't a hangout spot. You can't loiter around here." "I'm not loitering," she said politely. "I just asked the worker for a phone. He said no. I'm leaving now." "Not so fast," Cole said. "You got ID?"
Louise
looked surprised. "ID? Yeah," Jake said sharply. "Or should we assume you're hiding something?" "I'm not hiding anything," she replied gently, pulling out a small, worn wallet from her coat pocket. She handed them an old ID. Jake took the ID and looked at it. "Louise Carter, was born in 1952. "Wow," Cole chuckled. "She's ancient." Dick looked her up and down. "What are you doing out here this late, Grandma?" Louise stayed calm. "Told you." "I'm trying to get to my son." "What's his name?" Jake asked. Louise looked him in the eye. "His name is Major James Carter." The name made both officers pause for a second, but they quickly brushed it off. "Major, huh?" Cole said. "Mockingly? Army man?" "Yes," Louise said quietly. "You could say that?" Jake rolled his eyes. "Well, Major James can't help you now, can he?" He suddenly grabbed her arm. Not roughly, but not gently either. "All right," he said. "Let's run a check on you. You're acting strange." Louise didn't resist. But she looked him in the eye again and said something that made both men pause. "Please," she said. "Softly. Don't do this. My son won't like it." Jake looked at Cole and laughed. "Her son won't like it," Cole leaned in.
Oh, what's he gonna do?
Drop out of the sky and yell at us. Louise didn't answer. She just stood there, her body still and her face calm, like she had seen things much worse than this. Jake tapped his radio. Dispatch, we're checking on an older woman. Possible vagrant. Running ID now. They sat her on the curb, still holding her ID. Louise gently asked, "May I make one call?" "Just one. It's urgent." "No phones," Cole said quickly. "We'll wait here until we're done." Jake looked annoyed. "This is a waste of time, man. She's just old and weird." Cole was looking through her wallet and found an old photo. It showed a much younger Louise, holding a baby, standing beside a tall black man in a military uniform. "What's this?" Cole asked. "Photo from 1960? Jake smirked. "Yeah, probably her imagination." Louise looked at them again, eyes firm. "He's not imaginary." Cole tossed the wallet back beside her. "You need to get out of here, lady. This ain't a shelter." Louise slowly reached into her coat. The officers tensed. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small flip phone. It was almost dead, but it still had 1 bar of battery left. She flipped it open, quietly dialed one number. She didn't even hold it to her ear. She just whispered into it. They did it again. "I'm okay, but I need you." She hung up before they could stop her. Jake stepped forward. "Who did you just call?" Louise looked at him with calm, steady eyes. "My son." Cole looked up at the sky and laughed. "Great, can't wait to meet him," Louise said. "Nothing. Far away, miles and miles from that quiet gas station, a man, in a secret location, heard the call. He didn't speak, didn't panic. He stood up. People around him noticed. He stood up too. He picked up a military radio. All teams. Priority code read, "I need a lift. Now." A soldier nearby asked, "Is everything all right, sir?" The man didn't answer. He just said one thing, "My mother called." Back at the gas station, Louise sat on the curb while the officers continued. Mocking her, they had no idea what was coming. Officer Jake leaned against the patrol car, sipping his cold coffee, still laughing from what the old woman had just said. "She really said her son won't like this," he repeated, chuckling. Cole smirked. "Yeah, and next, she'll tell us he's Superman." They glanced over at Mrs. Louise Carter, who now sat quietly on the sidewalk. Her hands were in her lap. Her back was straight. She didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She just looked calm, like she had already seen how this would end. That made Jake uncomfortable. He walked over to her again and crouched down. "You think calling your son is going to scare us?" he asked. Louise looked him in the eyes and said nothing. "You're trespassing," he continued. "We can hold you for that." She nodded slowly. "You can do whatever you think is right." That answer wasn't what he expected. Cole shouted from the car, "Hey, we gonna take her in or what?" Jake stood up. "Yeah, let's book her for loitering." He pulled out a pair of cuffs and roughly grabbed her arm. She didn't resist, but she looked at him with steady eyes. "This is not necessary," she said softly. "You're making a mistake." Jake ignored her, clicked the cuffs around her wrists, and pulled her to her feet, as he led her toward the patrol car, too. Teenagers came out of the gas station. One of them held up a phone and started recording. "Yo," the teen said. "Why are you arresting her? She didn't do anything." Jake turned and snapped back off. "Don't interfere with police work. She just asked to use the phone." The teen replied, "I saw it." Jake waved them off. "Go home." The teen stepped back but kept filming. Cole opened the back door of the patrol car and motioned for Louise to get in. "I'm 73, she said gently. "I have arthritis in my knees." Cole rolled his eyes. "Get in the car, ma'am." Jake pushed her gently but firmly into the back seat. As the door slammed shut, Louise looked out the window at the night sky. Her face showed no fear. Inside the police station, a junior officer named Sandra sat at the front desk. She was young, fresh out of training, and still believed in doing what was right. She watched as Jake and Cole walked in with Louise. "We found her loitering outside the gas station." Jake said, "She wouldn't leave." Sandra looked at the old woman and felt uneasy. "She doesn't look dangerous," she said softly. Jake smirked. "She's got smart mouth. Claims her son's some military hotshot." Louise didn't respond. She just looked around the room calmly, Cole added. "Said her son won't like this. Like we're supposed to care." Sandra stepped closer. "Did she resist?" Jake shook his head. "Nah, just kept talking in riddles." Sandra glanced at Louise and then at the clock. "Want me to call social services?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "Whatever. We'll hold her in the side room until someone picks her up." They led Louise into a small side holding room. No bars, just for white walls, a chair, and a table. She sat down without complaint. Jake slammed the door behind her and laughed again. Back outside the station, the street was still quiet. But something had changed in the air. The wind picked up. Somewhere, miles away, the roar of rotor blades broke through the night. Inside a military base, the man who received the call from Louise was already in the air. He sat in a special ops chopper helmet on, eyes focused. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He just gave coordinates. Around him sat two silent men dressed in tactical gear. One whispered, "Sir, are we going loud?" The man, Major James Carter, looked at him and nodded. "She called me. That's all that matters." Back at the police station, Sandra returned to the holding room with a bottle of water for Louise. She gently placed it on the table. "Here, ma'am. It's cold." Louise smiled. "Thank you, dear. You're kind." Sandra sat across from her. "May I ask, who is your son?" Louise looked at her for a long moment. Then she said softly, "My son is not an ordinary man. He's done things this country will never speak about. He saves lives without medals. He gives orders to people. In suits." Sandra frowned. "You mean he's in the military?" Louise nodded. "You'll hear him before you see him," she added. "And when he speaks, people listen." Sandra didn't know whether to believe her or not. But something in the old woman's voice felt true. Sandra got up. "I'll be right back." Jake and Cole were in the break room laughing. "You should have seen her face when we cuffed her," Cole said. Jake grinned. "She still thinks her son's going to magically appear." Sandra walked in, holding a paper. "Hey," she said. "I ran her name." Jake raised an eyebrow and Sandra hesitated. Her file is sealed, but it shows a federal protection code, a reference to Army command. Jake stood up. "What?" Sandra showed him the screen. Jake frowned. "That doesn't make..." Since Cole stepped closer. "What's that mean?" Sandra said. "I think she's not lying." Suddenly, the power flickered. The lights blinked twice, and came back on. Then came a loud, deep sound. WHUMP WHUMP WHUMP. The window shook. Jake ran to the door. "What the hell is that?" Cole followed. They stepped outside. A military helicopter was lowering into the parking lot, black, unmarked, fast, and deadly. Its lights hit the building as if searching for something. Inside the chopper, Major James Carter removed his helmet and stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a combat uniform covered in ribbons, medals, and a special U.S. Army patch few had ever seen in person. His face was calm, focused. He didn't rush, but every step he took made the officers more nervous. Jake whispered, "That's not possible." Cole's hand shook. Sandra stood at the door, eyes wide. Major Carter walked straight toward them, and behind him, a soldier stepped out and said just one line. "We're here for Mrs. Carter. Her son requests her release." The sound of the helicopter still echoed across the parking lot. Its black blades slowed, but the shockwaves it brought were just beginning to settle. Inside the police station, a deep silence took over. The phone stopped ringing. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Officers froze in place, staring out the glass doors at the strange aircraft now resting in front of their building and stepping out of it. Man in full military combat gear. He didn't wear any name tag, but his chest was filled with medals. Silver Star, Bronze Star, and more symbols most officers there couldn't even recognize. Major. James Carter walked forward like a man on a mission, his boots landing firm on the pavement. His face was unreadable, not angry, not scared, just focused. Behind him walked two soldiers, dressed in black. Eyes scanning the building, Officer Jake and Cole stood by the station door, frozen. Jake whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Cole swallowed hard. Did she really call him? Before either could move, the side door of the chopper opened again, and a tall, lean woman in military uniform stepped out. She held a tablet in her hand. She approached the officers and handed Jake a piece of paper. Authorization to retrieve Mrs. Louise Carter, signed by Command Unit Bravo. Jake looked down at the page. His hand trembled. "But we only detained her for loitering," he said weakly. "She didn't have ID yet." "First, the woman officer didn't smile. She gave you her ID. You ignored it. It's a federal-level ID code. Didn't you scan it?" Cole stammered. "We just thought she was confused." "You thought wrong," she replied coldly. Inside the station, Sandra was still sitting with Louise in the small holding room. She could hear the rotors outside slowly coming to a stop, but her eyes were fixed on Louise. The old woman hadn't moved. She sat with her hands on her lap, her back straight, eyes looking forward like she already knew what was happening outside. "You weren't lying," Sandra whispered. Louise smiled. "Faintly, I told you. My son doesn't like when I'm disrespected." A moment later, the door opened. Jake stepped in, my face pale. Behind him stood Major James Carter. His presence filled the small room instantly. He didn't speak at first. He looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he finally said one word, softly, "Mom." Double quotes, Louise stood slowly, her hands still in cuffs. "My boy," she said with quiet pride. "You came." James walked forward and gently removed the cuffs from her wrists with one smooth motion, without even asking permission from the officers. He helped her sit again. Then he turned to Jake. "You two arrested my mother." His voice was combat, deadly. Jake opened his mouth to defend himself, but James cut him off. "You mocked her?" Cole stood behind him in the hallway, looking helpless. James leaned closer to Jake. "You put your hands on her?" Jake stuttered. She didn't say who she was at first, and she asked to use a phone," James said. "All," Sandra stepped forward. "I can confirm that, sir." She was very polite. James looked at her. "Thank you, officer." He then pulled out a badge from his chest pocket. It wasn't just any badge. It was a Presidential Command Medal rare, and only given to the highest, most respected military leaders. Jake and Cole looked at it with wide eyes. "I've led over 50 Black Ops missions across 5 continents," James said. "I've saved diplomats. I've pulled soldiers from burning choppers. I've been shot 5 times. And the only time I ever panicked was when I got my mother's call." He turned to Sandra. "May I speak to her alone for a minute?" Sandra nodded and stepped out. Jake and Cole followed quietly, unsure what else to do. Now alone in the room, James turned to his mother. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I'm fine, just tired." He took her hands and held them. "I told you to call me if anything ever happened. I didn't want to cause a scene," she said. "But they didn't listen. You did the right thing, Mama." There was a pause. Then Louise said, "They laughed at me, James. Called me names, called me Grandma like it was an insult." James clenched his jaw. "They don't know who you are. I'm just your mother," she said. "Simply you're more than that. You're the reason I became who I am." Outside the room, the station was in chaos. The police chief, it's an older man named Captain Harris, had finally arrived after being called. He was trying to understand what was happening when a military assistant handed him a file. It was a sealed folder with top priority eyes only stamped across the front. Inside was a summary of Louise, Carter's son, Major James Carter, decorated hero, Special Forces, held at the highest clearance level in the military. "Why didn't anyone tell me who she was?" the chief snapped. Sandra replied, "She did tell them. They didn't listen." The chief turned to Jake and Cole, who now looked more like nervous recruits than confident officers. "Go to my office. Now." They disappeared without a word. Back in the holding room, James helped his mother stand. "Let's go home," he said. She smiled. "You came in a helicopter," he grinned. "Only for you." As they stepped out of the room, everyone turned to look. Officers stood at attention. Some saluted. Some lowered their eyes in shame. No one dared speak. The chief walked forward. "Sir Major." "Carter, I'm terribly sorry about the mistake." James raised his hand. "We'll talk later. I need to get my mother out of here." They walked past the line of stunned officers and toward the exit as they reached the front door. Louise stopped. She turned around and looked at the room full of police, and then she said something no one expected. "I forgive you. But I hope next time you listen to the quiet ones. Because we're not always weak." And she stepped outside into the cool night air where the chopper waited as the helicopter lifted into the sky. Everyone at the station watched silently. The night had started with mockery, but it ended with respect, hours before the helicopter landed and long before the police. Chief knew what was happening. ... One phone call changed everything. Mrs. Louise. Carter sat in the back of the patrol car, hands cuffed gently but firmly behind her. Her shoulders ached, but she didn't complain. The young officers outside kept laughing. One of them had said, "Call your army boy now. Maybe he'll parachute in." She had smiled quietly and lowered her head. Then she carefully shifted in her seat and pulled something out of her coat. It was an old flip phone, small, scratched, but still working. A tiny light blinked on the screen. 1% battery. She opened it. The screen flickered once, then held steady with slow fingers. She pressed just one button, a number saved as #1. The phone rang just once. Then someone picked up. There was a pause. No hello. No noise. Then came a calm, deep voice. "Mama." She closed her eyes and whispered, "They did it again, James." He didn't respond right away. She added softly, "It's not bad. I'm okay, but I thought you should know." Still, he didn't speak. Then finally he asked, "Where are you?" Her voice was gentle. "Small town gas station, west side. Please pick me up." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "Stay calm. I'll be there." Before you blink. Then the call ended. Battery, 0%. The screen went black. But that one moment had already put everything in motion. Thousands of miles away, Major James Carter stood inside a high-security military training site known only to elite forces. The location was confidential, marked off even from the public military map. He was in the middle of a night training drill when his phone rang direct line. Secure only between him and one person, his mother. He looked at the caller ID and froze. Then he answered, and everything changed. James turned to his team tough, silent men trained to handle war zones, hostage rescues, and terrorist takedowns. He gave them one look. They knew instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply said, "Prep the Hawk." Within 3 minutes, a black stealth helicopter was fueled and ready on the pad. James pulled on his custom combat vests stitched with elite task force markings that not even generals had clearance to wear. As he walked toward the helicopter, a soldier ran after him. "Sir, orders from above. They're asking why you're breaking formation." James stopped walking. He didn't look back. He just said, "My mother was disrespected." The soldier nodded and backed away. "No more questions." James climbed into the chopper, gave the pilot coordinates, and locked in. The mission: extract Mrs. Louise Carter, while the helicopter raced through the sky, cutting across quiet towns and dark fields. James opened a secure communication channel. It wasn't just military, it was higher than that. He activated a small voice recorder and spoke into it. "Request immediate attention from National Law Enforcement Liaison. Subject: wrongful detainment of federal VIP authorization. Eco 7 Green Beret Priority 1. Confirm now." Seconds later, a voice responded. "Confirmed. Mobilizing alert. Units. Do you require ground backup?" James said. "No, I'll be enough." Back at the police station, the officers still had no idea what was heading their way. Jake leaned back in a chair, scrolling through his phone. Cole sat across from him, finishing a donut. She said her son's in the military. Cole laughed. They all say that. Jake rolled his eyes. Next she'll say he's got secret clearance. Then without warning, the building lights flickered. Once, twice. They steadied again, but something felt off. Sandra walked into the room, holding a small printed report in her hand. I ran her background again, she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. And Sandra placed the report on the table. This woman is under military family protection. That's not normal. Cole leaned over. So? Sandra looked at them seriously. You need to stop joking. Her son might be someone real.
Someone
high level. Jake stood up. Okay, let's say she's telling the truth. So what? Then came the sound. Distant at first like a deep, steady pulse. Hump. W-H-U-M-P. Hump. The window glass began to shake. Jake looked toward the front entrance. What is that? Sandra walked toward the door. Then she saw it. A black chopper descending from the sky. No police logo, no news marking. It was military. Silent, fast, smooth. Jake and Cole rushed out, following her. They stood on the sidewalk, looking up in disbelief. The helicopter landed right in their parking lot lights, blinding dust, spinning. Everywhere then, as the blades slowed, a tall man stepped out. Major James Carter had arrived. He wore no smile, no fear. Only respect and the kind of presence that filled the air with tension. Officers from every corner of the station stood at the windows, watching him walk. His uniform was heavy with awards. His boots hit the ground like thunder, and in his hand a leather folder stamped with the seal of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Jake whispered, "No way." Cole's jaw dropped. Sandra took a step back and said quietly, she wasn't lying. Inside the station, the phone began ringing off the hook. News had spread. Higher-up agencies had received alert signals. Internal Affairs had already sent a notice. Federal attention, active standby for investigation. James stepped in too. The police station without waiting for permission. He walked straight to the front desk. The young officer standing there tried to speak, but James simply raised the folder and laid it on the desk. A voice from behind whispered, "That's the Eco 7 seal. That's serious." James spoke only one line. "I'm here for Louise Carter. I suggest you hand her over now." Inside the holding room, Louise sat quietly. She heard the rotors die down. She closed her eyes and smiled. He's here. The police station had never seen anything like this. The front doors opened with a silent push. And just like that, Major James Carter stepped inside. He didn't shout. He didn't show anger. But the silence that followed his entrance was louder than any siren. His boots clicked slowly on the tile floor as he walked past the front desk behind him. Two silent military men followed Deitch, wearing black gear visors and earpieces. Scanning every corner like it was a battlefield, James's presence made officers step back without realizing it. Some stood frozen. Others turned away, pretending to look busy, but everyone knew something serious had just walked into their world. At the far end of the hallway, Captain Harris, the station chief, came rushing down, still buttoning his uniform coat. Sweat ran down his forehead. He hadn't even had time to finish his dinner when the call came in. An elite military commander is en route to your location. Prepare for debrief. He hadn't believed it until now. He stopped 5 feet away from James, almost out of breath. "Major Carter?" he said quickly, extending a hand. "I'm Captain Harris. This is unexpected." James didn't take the handshake. He simply looked at the man with cold, steady eyes. "Where's my mother?" he asked. The air turned heavy. Harris cleared his throat. "She's safe, sir, in holding, but she's unharmed. We're trying to understand what happened." "I know what happened," James interrupted. "Two of your officers mocked a 73-year-old woman, refused her the right to make a call, ignored her ID, and placed her in cuffs without proper cause." He leaned in slightly. "That woman is my mother. And I don't think you realize who you just humiliated. The hallway was still. Harris stepped back. I apologize. Deeply. We didn't know who she was. James spoke calmly, but the weight of his words shook the air. You didn't have to know who she was. You just had to treat her like a human being. At that moment, Jake and Cole peeked from around the corner, hoping not to be seen, but James saw them. With one sharp nod, he pointed to them. You two. Step forward, they hesitated. Harris turned. Go on, he knows. The two officers walked slowly toward James, their uniforms suddenly feeling too small. Jake tried to speak first. Sir, we didn't mean. James raised a hand. Don't speak. Just listen. He took a slow step forward, his voice low and controlled. You had a chance to treat an elderly woman with respect. Instead, you laughed at her. You doubted her. You handcuffed her. Jake swallowed hard. She asked politely, James said. She didn't fight. She didn't curse. She just asked to use a phone. And you mocked her for it. Cole shifted. Nervously, sir, we thought she was just ... Another street person. James's eyes narrowed. Just... that word right there tells me everything. Jake opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, a sharp voice echoed from James's. Radio. Eagle 1 to Carter. Confirming extraction orders complete. Ground crew standing by. James pressed the button on his collar mic. Copy. Notified. Still addressing internal error. Give me 5. He turned back to the officers. Do you know what that was? He asked. Neither man answered. That was the voice of a command pilot. They don't fly unless I say so. And tonight I pulled them off a surveillance mission. For her. He pointed toward the holding rooms because she is more important than anything else in this world. No. Not just because she's my mother, but because she taught me what it means to lead with decency and discipline. Both officers lowered their eyes. You failed both tonight, James, added Captain Harris. Step forward, sir. I assure you, we will be filing internal reports. These officers will face disciplinary review. James nodded. That's a start. Then he said something that sent chills down the hallway. But this won't stop here. In another part of the building, Louise Carter sat quietly in the holding room. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't worried. She just sat still, sipping the bottle of water Sandra had left for her. Suddenly, the door opened. James entered. Alone. He paused when he saw her. Her calm face, her soft smile, her strong spirit. He walked in slowly. Hey, Mama, he said, his voice finally softening. Louise smiled warmly. You came quick. James knelt beside her and gently held her hand. You called. That's all I needed. She looked at him with kind eyes. I didn't want to interrupt your work. You didn't interrupt. You reminded me why I do it. Sat in silence for a moment. Louise looked around the small room. It's funny how people treat you when they don't know who you are. James nodded. It's always like that, Louise said. I didn't tell them who you were right away. I gave them a chance to do the right thing. And they failed, James said. But I forgave them anyway, she replied. James looked at her with admiration. You always do. Outside the room, station was buzzing. The helicopter crew was waiting for James's signal. The Army's legal division had already begun preparing a statement, and an email alert had been sent to Internal Affairs Command, labeled Priority. Read. The officers in the building had no idea how far this would reach. James stood up and helped his mother to her feet. Let's go, he said. Time to take you home. She nodded, but before walking out, she stopped. Do they know who you really are? She asked. James smiled faintly. It will. As they stepped into the hallway, the entire station fell silent. Every officer stood. Some saluted, some lowered their heads. Louise walked beside her son calm. Graceful, no anger in her face, just strength. When they reached the exit, James turned. One last time to everyone, he said. You don't need to fear people like me. But you should fear what happens when you disrespect someone who never deserved it. And with that, they stepped outside. The helicopter sat waiting, blades slow, cabin doors open. The crew stood at attention. James helped his mother climb in. She turned back one last time and looked at the police station. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than anything as the chopper lifted into the sky. The streets below grew quiet again. The night was cold, but something had changed. The woman they mocked had become the woman they would never forget. Before the helicopter, before the military alert, before anyone in the police station knew who she was, there was just a tired old woman. Mrs. Louise Carter had walked into that gas station like any grandmother might. Slow steps, calm voice, and tired eyes. Her only request was simple. "May I please use your phone? Just one quick call?" The cashier had ignored her, then refused her. Outside, 2 officers sat in a patrol car, finishing coffee and scrolling their phones. Officer Jake saw her first. "Look at that," he said, nudging his partner. Wandering the streets like a zombie, Officer Cole laughed. "Probably drunk or crazy." Jake added, "There was no crime. There was no crime, no danger, just a woman standing near a map, trying to figure out where she was. But to them, she was suspicious." Jake stepped out of the car with a fake smile. "Hey there, Grandma," he said. "You lost?" Louise looked up and nodded politely. "No, sir. Just trying to find a phone. My mobile died, and I need to call my son." Cole joined in. "Why not wait inside a shelter?" Louise said gently. "I don't need a shelter, just a phone." Jake folded his arms. "Well, this isn't a phone booth." She gave a soft nod. "I understand." But as she turned to leave, Jake stepped in front of her. "You got ID?" Louise paused. "Yes, but why?" "We're just checking. Standard procedure." Cole smirked behind him. "Standard for people like her, right?" Louise slowly opened her coat and handed over her ID. Jake glanced at it without much care. "Louise Carter, 73. No known residence." "I have a home," she said calmly. "I'm just on the road tonight." "Why?" Louise looked him in the eye. "To meet my son." Jake laughed. "What's he gonna do? Fly in and rescue you?" "He might," she replied softly. Cole chuckled. "We'll keep you comfy until he arrives." That's when Jake grabbed her wrist. Not violently, not gently either. Louise didn't resist. But her voice changed slightly. "Please, don't do this. My son won't like it." Jake looked at Cole and burst out laughing. Cole added, "Is he Batman?" Jake pulled out cuffs. "Ma'am, you're being detained for loitering and refusing to comply." "I didn't refuse," she said gently. Jake didn't care. The cold metal cuffs clicked shut around her frail wrists. Louise didn't scream, didn't argue. She just looked at them with tired eyes. The gas station worker stepped outside, curious. "What's going on?" Jake replied, "She was bothering customers." "She just asked for the phone," the worker said. Jake snapped, "You want to be part of this?" The worker backed off. Inside the patrol car, Louise sat still. She didn't deserve this. She had said nothing wrong. But still, she was treated like a criminal, her only crime. Looking old, looking poor, not looking powerful. They drove her to the station in silence. Cole played music. Jake laughed as he scrolled his phone. Louise looked. Out the window, she wasn't thinking about revenge, or yelling, or fighting. She was thinking of her son, and she knew he will come. At the station, they walked her through the front doors. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. They didn't process her formally. They didn't offer water. They just put her in the small holding room and walked away, like she didn't matter. In the corner of the room sat a young Officer Sanderfresh. From the academy, she had watched the whole thing quietly. Something about it didn't feel right. She approached the 2 officers. "Why is she in cuffs?" she asked. Jake rolled his eyes. "Loitering. Maybe mental health issues?" "Did she resist?" "Nope." "Did she threaten anyone?" "Nope." "Then why is she in a holding cell?" Jake scoffed, "'Cause I said so." Sandra turned toward the room and saw the old woman sitting quietly, hands still behind her back. She walked in with a cup of water. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Sandra. Are you okay? Louise smiled faintly. Yes, dear. Thank you. Would you like to make a call? Louise lifted her wrists slightly. Hard with these on. Sandra blinked. They cuffed you. For asking for a phone? Louise nodded. That's how it begins. Sandra gently left the room and walked back to her desk. She started typing. She ran Louise's ID properly. The screen flashed. One word stood out. Classified family status. Do not ignore. Sandra's heart skipped a beat. She clicked deeper. Red warning boxes appeared. Direct relation to Major James Carter, Green Beret, national hero. Immediate VIP treatment required. She looked up at Jake and Cole, who were now laughing in the break room. And that's when she knew. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Meanwhile, inside the room, Louise reached into her coat pocket. Her flip phone had barely any charge, just 1%. She opened it and pressed one button. James, it's me. Across the world, in a secure compound, a soldier heard the phone. Buzz. He stood up. He picked up the line. Then he heard her voice. They did it again. I'm okay, but I need you. The call ended, and with it every wall between justice and power collapsed. It started with one call, not from an officer, not from a general, but from a mothercom, quiet, handcuffed in a small town. Police station. And it traveled faster than anything the cops inside that building could ever imagine. The moment Major James Carter received his mother's call, he didn't waste time. He alerted his private line, one connected to a restricted military channel used only in emergency situations. Within 2 minutes, a signal was transmitted to Pentagon HQ. Inside a dimly lit office in Washington, D.C., a military intelligence analyst named Theo Raines sat at his desk sipping black coffee. His screen suddenly flashed. ECH-07 flagged. Family security violation alert. Green Beret PROI. He sat upright. ECO-7. That's Carter, he whispered. He quickly tapped a code into his keyboard and brought up a profile. Major James Carter. U.S. Army Special Forces. Decorated hero. Top clearance. Black Ops commander. Known to presidents. Feared by enemies. Respected by allies. The screen blinked again. Family. Louise Carter's status. Federal PR. Titus' fingers paused. He reached for the phone. Get me General Holt. Priority red. Across the city inside a marble-floored conference room at the Department of Defense. A video call buzzed to life. On screen appeared General Edward Holt, a man with steel-gray hair and the sharp eyes of a battlefield veteran. He leaned closer to the camera. You're telling me someone detained Louise Carter? Theo nodded. Yes, sir. Small-town PD. Officers didn't scan her ID. We believe she was mocked, possibly manhandled.
Oh.
She placed a distress call to her son, and now he's on the move. Holt muttered under his breath, oh no. You know what that means, don't you? Theo asked carefully. Holt looked dead into the camera. We don't send troops. We don't raise weapons. Get out of his way. Back at the small-town police station. The air had changed. The helicopter had landed. James had arrived. His mother was released. But the real shock hadn't come yet. That came in the form of a call to Captain Harris's private office. His phone lit up. Washington, D.C., Department of Defense. He froze before answering. Hello? A deep voice came through. It was General Holt himself. Captain Harris, this is a courtesy call. I'm calling regarding the wrongful detention of a federal protected citizen, Louise Carter. Harris stuttered. Yes, sir. We're handling it now. We didn't know who she was. I understand, Holt said. But now you do. Yes. Sir, and let me be clear, Holt continued. Your officers put hands on the mother of a man who leads classified missions around the globe. A man who has the power to start or stop operations with one word. You handcuffed her, mocked her, humiliated her, and then laughed about it. Harris went silent. This isn't just a mistake, Holt said. It's a national embarrassment. And if you don't issue a formal apology and file disciplinary action by midnight, Your station will be on every news channel in the country by morning. Harris's voice cracked. Understood, sir? Holt paused for a beat. Good. Intel. Your boys. He showed mercy today. Next time he might not. Click. Meanwhile, inside the chopper on standby outside, Louise sat in the back, looking out the window at the stars. James sat beside her. His tone had softened, but his mind was still alert. Washington called me, he said suddenly. There. Sending formal notice to the station, Louise turned to him. I didn't mean to cause all this. You didn't, he replied. They did. She nodded slowly, still. I hope they learned something from it. James looked at her. You've always been stronger than me, he said, and I've been to war. Louise smiled. You just have better gear. Back inside the station, Sandrotha, the young officer, sat at her desk as chaos unfolded around her. Emails were pouring in. Headquarters had sent a mandatory emergency meeting alert. The subject line read, Violation of Federal Protectee Protocol. Immediate staff review. Jake and Cole sat silently across from Captain Harris, who now looked 20 years older than he had just hours ago. I told you to treat her kindly, Sandra muttered under her breath. Jake wiped his face. I didn't know. No, you didn't care, Sandra said. There's a difference. Outside, camera crews had already begun to gather. The town was small, but news spread fast. People whispered, military chopper. Old lady in cuffs. Her son is a war hero. A reporter snapped a photo as Louise stepped out of the helicopter for just a moment to stretch her legs. The photo would go viral the next morning. An elderly woman standing tall beside a silent soldier. No words, just power and presence inside. The chopper. James received one final message on his secure phone. Stand down. Washington handled it. Your mother is now under permanent protection order. Mission complete. Oh. He read it, then smiled softly. Turning to his mother, he said, They'll never touch you again. Louise gave a knowing nod. Let's go home. As the helicopter rose into the night sky once more, the whole town looked up. Some stared with regret. Others watched with awe, but every officer at that station now understood. They didn't just cuff a tired old woman. They cuffed the heart of a warrior and woke the sleeping lion who guards her. The sun had barely risen when the story exploded. No one in the small police station had slept. But by morning they knew sleep was the least of their worries, because now the whole world was watching. It began with a single photo. An early morning journalist from a local paper had been driving past the station when he saw something strange, a black military helicopter parked outside a small-town precinct. He pulled over and raised his camera, and at that exact moment, the station door opened. Out stepped an elderly black woman, tired, quiet, standing beside a man in full military gear. No expression, just calm dignity. The photo was posted at 6:08 a.m. with a caption that read, Who is this woman? And why did a war hero land at a police station in the middle of the night? By 6:14 a.m., it had been shared 1,200 times. By 7 a.m., national reporters were calling the station. By 9 a.m., it was trending in 4 countries under hashtags. Hashtag military son. Hashtag she called her son. Hashtag respect her at the police station. Chaos had fully set in. Captain Harris stood in the break room holding 3 phones at once. I said no comments, he barked. Yes, we're aware of the photo. No, we don't. Have a statement yet? In front of the building, news vans had arrived. Cameramen lined the sidewalk. Reporters stood with mics in hand, shouting questions. Is it true she was arrested for no reason? Is her son really the most decorated soldier in the country? Did she really call him from the back seat of a police car? Inside, Jake and Cole sat in silence in a private room. Their uniforms looked wrinkled. Their eyes were red. Cole scrolled through the news feed on his phone and whispered, Dude, we're done. Jake stared at the wall, jaw clenched. One headline read, Cops cuff veteran's mother's son shows up in chopper. Another, Grandma silenced, son answers with military might.
What?
And then came the worst one. She warned them. My son won't like this. Jake slammed his fist on the table. They twisted it. Cole looked at him. Did they? Neither of them spoke after that. Elsewhere in the building, Officer Sandra watched it all unfold from her desk. She wasn't surprised. She had seen the look in Louise Carter's eyes the night before quiet. She had watched the old woman sit calmly, waiting for justice. Sandra opened her inbox and found a message marked Confidential, Internal Investigation. PROCED, and Jashi sighed. At least something was finally being done. Meanwhile, in a quiet, military base far away from the media noise, Major James Carter sat alone in his small office. The mission was complete. His mother was safe. But now, the world had stepped in. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a top official. Sir, public interest is rising. Would you like us to prepare a statement? James typed only one word, no. He looked up at the wall. There was a photo there, an old one. Him in uniform. Next to him, a woman in a church dress, proud and gentle. His mother, he smiled faintly. She didn't need his protection anymore. The world had become her shield. Now back in her home, Louise Carter sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea. Her hands were calm, her breathing steady. The TV in the background played the morning news. And the woman, later identified as Louise Carter, mother of Major James Carter, was briefly detained last night by 2 small-town police officers. Host added, "What followed may go down in history as the most graceful revenge story of the decade." Louise turned off the TV. She didn't care about headlines. She just wanted her peace back. But her phone wouldn't stop, ringing friends, neighbors, reporters, even politicians. She answered only one call. It was from a young woman who said, "Miss Carter, I'm from a high school in Chicago. Would you be willing to speak to our students about dignity and strength?" Louise smiled. "I'm not a public speaker," she said kindly. The girl on the other end replied, "You already spoke loud enough. You just didn't need a microphone." The White House press briefing later that day, a reporter asked, "Is it true that Major Carter violated protocol when responding to his mother's distress call?" The press secretary paused, then said, "He didn't violate anything. He honored everything, including his mother." The room fell silent by sunset. A new headline had taken over the web. They thought she was just a tired old lady. Then the world found out who her son was. People shared their own stories in the comments. One wrote, "My grandma was treated badly at a hospital once. No one stood up. I wish she had a James Carter." Others said, "Power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in a chair." At the small-town police station, the front desk now had a sign, "No one is just anything. Respect is standard here." Sandra had put it there. No one dared remove it as the day ended. Louise sat in her rocking chair by the window. James called her one last time that night. "Are you okay, Mama?" She smiled. "Yes, baby. I'm just tired of being underestimated." James chuckled. "You'll never be underestimated again." She looked out at the stars. Good. Then maybe the next old lady won't have to call her son. 2 days had passed. The storm hadn't calmed. If anything, it had only grown louder. Every talk show in America was discussing Louise Carter, the quiet old woman who called her son. It changed everything. But while the world argued about justice, race, power, and respect, Louise Carter remained still. She didn't post. She didn't even speak to the media. She just sat on her porch. She always did, peaceful, quiet, watching the wind move through the trees until a black car pulled into her driveway. It wasn't loud, no flashing lights, no crowd, just one simple, black sedan, tinted windows and an American flag decal on the plate. A well-dressed man in a black suit stepped out. He didn't look like a police officer. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like someone sent from somewhere important. He walked slowly to the porch, holding a sealed white envelope in both hands. "Ms. Carter?" he said politely. Louise looked up and smiled faintly. "Yes." Bowed his head slightly. "I was instructed to deliver this to you by hand, directly from the White House." Louise blinked. "The White House?" "Yes, ma'am, from the president himself." He held out the envelope. It was thick, heavy, embossed with a gold eagle seal. Louise didn't take it right away. "Are you sure this is for me?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. They even spelled your name twice to be certain." She chuckled softly and accepted it. The man tipped his head once more, turned, and returned to the car. No cameras, no speeches, just quiet respect. Louise sat back in her chair and looked at the letter. She carefully peeled open the seal and unfolded the page. The letter was written in clean, elegant handwriting. It read, "The White House, Washington, D.C. Dear Mrs. Louise Carter, I write to you today, not as a president, but as a son. I saw the video, I saw the photos, I read the reports, but more importantly, I saw you. I saw a mother who raised a man, who became a symbol of strength, discipline, and honor. A son who didn't ask for war, but who stood ready to defend his country. And yet the greatest act of leadership I saw was yours. You did not raise your voice. You did not demand cameras. You did not insult anyone. Instead, you made one call in. You trusted that love and truth would do the rest." Us. As president, I want to formally apologize for the way you were treated. As a man, I want to say thank you, not only for raising a hero, but for being one. Yours with great respect, the President of the United States. Louise sat in silence. Her fingers lightly touched the signature at the bottom. Tears formed in her eyes. But she didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because in that moment, she felt seen. Later that day, she placed the letter in a wooden frame and set it on the table next to her son's photo. When James called that evening, she told him about it. "They sent someone?" He asked. "They did," she said. "You okay?" "I'm more than okay." She paused, then added with a smile, "Turns out I'm famous." James chuckled. "You always were. The world just caught up." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Captain Harris held an emergency staff meeting. The mood was heavy. The photo of Louise and James now hung on their digital board. Everyone had seen the apology letter from the president. It had been shared online. Harris stood in front of his staff and spoke quietly. "I don't care what anyone thought she looked like," he said. "That woman did nothing wrong, and the way she was treated wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure." Jake sat at the back, eyes down coal beside him, hadn't said a word since the second day. Harris looked around the room. "We all need to be better," he continued, "'cause the next person who walks through that door may not have a son and a chopper. But they still matter." The room stayed silent, but the message hit hard. By now, the story had reached every corner of the internet. A college professor assigned it as reading. A group of high school students painted a mural of Louise and her son standing, side by side, under the words, "Dignity never needs to shout." A U.S. Army general shared a post. "Behind every soldier is someone who taught them how to stand tall. Respect the quiet ones. They're usually the strongest." Reporters still tried to get interviews. One even flew in from London, but Louise never stepped in front of a camera. When asked why, she said softly, "I already said what I needed to say. I just didn't use a microphone." That night, as the stars filled the sky above her porch, Louise Carter sat quietly once again, just as she always had. Only now. The world outside her window had changed, not because she shouted, not because she fought, but because she stayed true to who she was, and reminded the world that sometimes one calm voice, one steady heart, and one quiet phone call can speak louder than anything else. 1 week after the storm, something beautiful happened. It started with a single letter. Dot. From the police, not from the military, not even from the press. This one came from the Office of Civic Honors in Washington, D.C. See, it was written with elegance and care. Read, "Dear Mrs. Louise Carter, the United States honors not only those who serve on the battlefield, but also those who teach courage, dignity, and quiet leadership in everyday life. For your grace, under pressure, for your example to this country, and for the strength you showed in the face of injustice. We invite you to the Capitol for a special recognition ceremony. With respect and admiration, the Committee of Civic Courage, Washington, D.C. Louise Carter sat at her small kitchen table. Reading the letter twice, She folded it neatly, looked out the window, and whispered, "They want to give me an award for being still." James Carter stood outside her house that morning, dressed in a black suit, not military, just a simple jacket and tie. He opened the car door for her like a chauffeur. "Ready to meet the country, Mama?" Louise smiled. "Hey, only if I don't have to speak." He laughed. "You already did. You just didn't use a mic." When they landed in Washington, D.C., 2 government vehicles waited at the airport. No press, no crowd, just quiet dignity. They were taken to a hotel near Capitol Hill. Inside, a navy blue dress hung waiting on the bed, tailored, elegant, respectful. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive. It was exactly her style. The next morning, Louise stood in front of the mirror. Smoothing the fabric of the dress was slow, careful hands, her eyes filled with a gentle emotion. Not pride, not nervousness, just peace. James stood in the doorway. "You look like the flag should salute you," he said with a grin. She chuckled softly. "Don't make me blush." At the Capitol, a quiet ceremony was set inside one of the oldest marble chambers in the building. Only a few rows of chairs, no flashing cameras, no dramatic music, just warmth. A host stepped up to the podium and spoke. "Today, we recognize a woman who didn't break a window, didn't yell into a crowd, didn't raise her fists. She simply reminded the world what quiet strength looks like." Then she looked toward Louise. "Mrs. Carter, would you please join us?" Louise rose slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't wobble. She just walked with her back straight, head high, and a soft smile on her face. As she approached the podium, the entire room stood up. Generals, senators, educators, soldiers, even the president's aide. They all stood, not for a medal, but for the woman who raised a warrior and remained one herself. James sat in the front row, watching his mother with the eyes of a boy, not a soldier. A boy who remembered bedtime prayers, a boy who remembered cold nights with hot soup, a boy who once cried after falling from his bike, only to hear her say, "Get up, you're stronger than pain." And now, here she was. The world was finally seeing what he had always known. The host continued. "We hereby present to Mrs. Louise Carter the National Medal of Civil Strength for her unwavering grace in the face of public disrespect, and for reminding our nation that power does not always shout." She pinned a silver and gold medal onto Louise's chest. The medal wasn't large, but the meaning behind it weighed heavier than gold. As Louise turned to face the audience, she paused. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stepped forward. Not to give a speech, just to say a few simple words. Into the microphone, she said, "You don't need a title to be strong. You just need to know who you are, and never let anyone else decide it for you." The room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds. Then applause rose loud, respectful. Full of feeling, no one shouted, no one cheered wildly, they just clapped like people do in church. Later that night, back in the hotel, Louise took off the medal and placed it beside her framed letter from the president. James brought her a cup of tea, sat beside her. "You were incredible." He said, "I didn't do anything special," she replied softly. He shook his head. "You did the most special thing of all. You stayed calm when the world expected you to fall apart." Louise smiled. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any chopper. Across the country, people watched the broadcast of the ceremony online. It wasn't viral, it wasn't loud, but it stayed with them, eh? Teacher paused her lesson to show it too. Her students, a retired veteran, wiped tears from his eyes. A young black woman whispered, "That could have been my grandma," and somewhere, in a quiet police station. Officer Sandra watched the ceremony on her phone during her break. When she saw Louise at the podium, she whispered, "You taught us all something." Then she printed out a photo from the broadcast and taped it to the staff room bulletin board. On it, she wrote in bold marker, "Never underestimate quiet people." As night fell on D.C., Louise Carter stood once more by her hotel window, looking at the city lights. She didn't ask for fame. She didn't ask for applause. But in a world that so often demands shouting, she reminded everyone that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't raise itself at all. The cameras had moved on. The medal had been hung. The headlines had faded, but back in the small, quiet town, something was still unfinished. Not in the news, not in Washington, but in the heart of one man who couldn't sleep at night. His name was Jake Martin, and he was one of the officers who put handcuffs on a woman who didn't deserve them. Jake had been avoiding mirrors lately. Every time he looked at his reflection, he didn't see a cop anymore. He saw a bully. He saw a fool. He saw a man who judged someone based on how slow they walked, instead of who they truly were. His partner Cole had quit, transferred to another state, but Jake stayed, and he couldn't stop thinking about her eyes the way Louise. Carter looked at him the moment the cuffs clicked shut. She didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She just looked disappointed. That was worse than any yelling. One Friday evening, Jake got into his truck and drove toward a small white house on the edge of town. The sky was soft and golden. The wind was calm. He had no badge on, no gun, no uniform, just a flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a heart heavy with guilt. He parked at the end of the driveway and sat in silence for a moment. He rehearsed what he would say. Twice he nearly turned the key and drove off. But then he saw her. Louise Carter sat on the porch in her wooden chair, just like she always did, calm, still, watching the world, as if she already knew how it would end. Jake stepped out of the truck slowly. Louise looked up. She didn't flinch, didn't frown. She just watched. Jake walked up the steps with his hands slightly raised, not in defense, but in peace. "Good evening, ma'am," he said quietly. Louise gave a small nod. "Evening." Jake cleared his throat. Not here to bother you. He paused. Looked down. "I needed to say something that's been stuck in my throat for weeks." Louise waited. Not impatient, not nervous, just present. Jake sat down on the porch edge, about 3 feet from her. His voice cracked slightly. "I was one of the officers that night, the one who put the cuffs on you." She looked at him gently.
I know.
"I thought I was doing my job," he said, "but I wasn't. I was doing what I assumed was right. That's not the same thing." Louise didn't speak. Jake continued. "I judged you because you were old, because you looked tired, because you asked for help, and I thought you were just wasting my time." He looked at her now, eyes red. "But what I did wasted your dignity, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Louise finally spoke. Her voice was soft, measured. "Why now?" Jake took a breath. "Because every time I close my eyes, I see you sitting in that room, not yelling, not begging. It's just waiting, and it haunts me." He looked down at his hands. "I saw the news. I saw your son. And I realized something. He didn't become a hero by accident. Someone taught him how to be strong, Scott and kind. And I put that someone in cuffs." Louise leaned back slowly in her chair. She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the trees. A dog barked in the distance. Then she said, "Do you know what hurt the most?" Jake looked at her, bracing himself. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She said calmly, "It wasn't the cuffs. It wasn't the words. It was knowing that if I had been someone else, maybe you would have helped me instead of humiliating me." Right. Lowered his head. "I know," he said. "And you're right." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "What will you do differently now?" Jake raised his eyes. "Everything," he said. "I want to be the kind of officer you'd trust. Your son with." Louise smiled faintly. "That's a good start." Jake looked surprised. You're not mad?" She shook her head gently. "I don't carry anger. It's too heavy for my bones." He smiled, a little tear in his eye. "Thank you," he whispered. Louise looked out toward the horizon. "Thank you for showing up." Most people don't. They sat for a while, not talking. Just two people, separated by age and past mistakes. Now joined by something rare, truth. As the sun dipped lower, Jake stood up. "I should go." Louise nodded. "Drive safe." He paused. Halfway down the porch, then turned back and said, "For what it's worth, You didn't just raise a hero, you are one. Louise smiled. This time, it wasn't faint. It was full. Proud. Proud free back in his truck, Jake finally looked in the mirror. Again, and this time, he saw someone trying to become better. Inside her home, Louise sat at her kitchen table looking at her framed medal and letter. Then, she pulled out a small notepad and wrote a few words. The greatest apology is changed behavior. She smiled, folded the note, and placed it by the door. Just in case someone else came looking for grace. It had been exactly 14 days since the cuffs were placed on Louise. Carter's wrists, and now her son was coming back. Not with a helicopter. Not with orders. Not with anger. But with something more powerful. A message the town needed to hear. When people first heard that Major James Carter was returning, rumors began again. Is he coming to shut the station down? Is he suing the city? Is he going to make a public speech? Has the town mayor even called Louise to ask if she needed security? Louise simply replied, he's not coming to punish anyone. He's coming to remind them how to stand taller. James arrived quietly. No uniform. No reporters. Just a clean shirt, dark jeans, boots, and a calm face. He parked his black SUV in front of the police station, where it had all started. Officer Sandra was the first to see him. She stepped outside. Nervous, but respectful. Major Carter, she said. I didn't know you were coming. James nodded with a small smile. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted this to be quiet. Sandra looked around. Should I notify the captain? James shook his head. I'll just wait right here, outside the station. Captain Harris heard the door open and looked up. There he was. The man whose shadow had hung over the station for 2 weeks, Major. Carter Harris stood quickly. Major, I didn't expect this. I figured, James said. But I needed to come. There was no fire in his tone, no threats, only calm authority. James continued. I came to talk, not to fight. Can we sit? Harris nodded and gestured to a small conference room. They sat across from each other at a wooden table. James folded his hands. You know what happened? You've apologized. That's enough for most people. But for me, there's one more thing. Harris looked nervous. James said softly, I want to speak to your officers. Harris blinked. All of them? Yes, today, if you don't mind. Harris nodded slowly, of course. 1 hour later, the entire team gathered in the main hall. Jake was there, Sandra too. Even the front desk staff and volunteers. There were no speeches prepared. Just a soldier in plain clothes. In a room full of people who once got it wrong, James stood in front of them, his hands behind his back. Eyes steady. Then he spoke. You don't know me. Honestly, I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm here to remind you of something big. That day, my mother didn't need protection. She needed patience. She didn't need force. She needed humanity. And for a moment, you forgot who you were supposed to be. He paused. No one moved. Even Jake stood frozen, guilt rising again in his chest. But James continued. I've been to war. I've seen good men fall because of a moment's mistake. But the worst mistake I ever saw wasn't made with a weapon. It was made with a uniform and an ego. You wear this badge not to control people, but to lift them. He turned and pointed gently to the door. That woman you put in cuffs. She's the reason I ever became a soldier. She taught me strength doesn't shout, it stands still. Silence filled the room. Not one officer looked away. Then James did something unexpected. He walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. He wrote just 3 words. See the person. Then he turned around. That's the rule. Not just for my mother. For every mother. Every father. Every teen. Every tired old soul who walks through that door, see the person. The room was still. Then slowly, Fencer Sandra clapped once. Then again others followed. Soon, the room was full of quiet, sincere applause. Not for James, but for the message they all should have known from the start. Afterward, Jake approached. James nervously. Sir, he said, I went to your mother's house. I apologized. James looked at him carefully. Did she forgive you? Jake nodded. Yes, then we're good. Jake looked surprised. That's it? James nodded. My mother doesn't teach people how to stay mad. She teaches people how to be better. Mike smiled, relieved, humbled, and changed. As James walked back to his SUV, Sandra caught up to him. Major, turned, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for today, but for how you showed up. James smiled. You'll always remember. How people made you feel. That's leadership, she nodded. He got in his car, drove off quietly. No cameras. No news vans, just respect in every pair of eyes that watched him go. That night, back on her porch, Louise looked up and saw headlights in the distance. James parked the car and stepped out. She smiled. Did you teach them something? I think so. Did they listen? He sat beside her. I think they finally saw you. Louise rocked gently in her chair and whispered, Good. That's all I ever wanted. Weeks had passed. The news stories faded. The chopper sounds were long gone. The headlines had been replaced with new ones. But in one small town, something had changed, and it wasn't going away. Not because of force, not because of law, but because of a woman's quiet strength, and how it made the town see itself. Differently, it started with the school, East Maple Elementary, just a few blocks from the police station. It's holding a faculty meeting. Principal Rivera stood at the front of the teacher's lounge and said, There's someone I'd like to honor in our building. Someone who showed this whole country what dignity looks like. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her displayed a photo. Louise Carter, standing beside her son at the Capitol ceremony. The room went quiet. Rivera continued. We're renaming the school library in her honor. Staff broke into applause. Ms. Jennings, the reading teacher, smiled. She's already in our lesson plans. My fifth graders called her a real-life Rosa Parks. Someone laughed softly, except Rosa never had a green beret for a son. 2 weeks later, the school held a quiet event. No press, no fancy banners. It's just a new sign above the library door. The Louise Carter reading room strength begins with silence and grows through words. Louise was invited, but she didn't want a stage. She simply walked in with a soft smile, took a look around, and whispered to the librarian, Make sure the children always have a place to sit and feel safe. That was all she asked. But it didn't stop there. The local art center held a mural contest. Teen artists submitted dozens of sketches, dragons, mountains, historical scenes. But the winning piece, a mural of Louise Carter sitting on her porch, holding a teacup with soft light behind her. Above it were the words, You don't need to shout to be heard. The mural was painted on the side of the town community center, right across from the police. Station. Jake saw it every morning when he arrived for work, and every time he passed it, he tipped his head and said, Morning, Mrs. Carter. Even if she wasn't there back at Louise's house, things stayed simple. She still woke up at 6, still swept her porch every morning, still made tea at 3, but something had changed, not in her, but in the way people came to her. One afternoon, a woman knocked at her door holding a notebook. She was young, maybe 20, with wide, nervous eyes. Miss Carter? She asked. Yes? I'm writing a college paper on the power of quiet protests. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions? Louise looked at her kindly and replied, Only if you'll stay for tea. The young woman smiled with relief. Deal. Days later, 2 kids from the middle school walked up shyly to her porch. One had a poster, the other a marker. Can we have your autograph? They asked. Louise chuckled. I'm not a celebrity. One of the boys replied. Our mom said, You're the reason people treat her nicer at work now. Louise paused, touched. She signed the poster slowly and said, Be kind. Even when no one's looking, that's when it matters most. The kids nodded and ran off. Even the mayor came by. She didn't give a speech. She just stood on the porch and handed
to Louise a certificate.
In honor of your grace, this town owes you its reflection, its respect. Louise didn't ask for it, but she accepted it. not out of pride, but out of purpose, because she knew if her story helped even one person be treated better, then everything was worth it. One evening, James called from overseas. He was deployed. Again, but he never missed a call home. "You're becoming a legend," he joked. Louise smiled. "Legends usually sleep more." James laughed. "Anything you need?" Louise looked around her quiet living room. "No, I have everything I need. But thank you." Then she paused. "There is one thing." "What's that?" "Make sure you come back home in one piece." James nodded. "Always, Mama." Back at the police station, Officer Sandra started a new program. It was called Pause Before Power. Every new recruit had to go through her course. She used the Louise Carter story as the main example. She stood in front of every rookie class and said, "This woman was handcuffed for asking to use a phone, and she changed the nation without yelling once." Remember, every decision you make in uniform tells people who you are. You might forget the moment, but they'll remember it forever. Louise's Deweeze's. Porch flowers began to bloom, bright, bold, still like her. One morning, the mailman left a large envelope at her door. She opened it and found a short letter. "Mrs. Carter, you are now part of the National Archives. Your story will be studied by generations. Thank you for showing us that dignity still exists in its purest form." The Smithsonian Institute. Louise closed the letter and took a deep breath. It was strange. All of this just because she had refused to lose her peace that night. Louise looked out at the sky and thought to herself, "I didn't change the world, but maybe I helped it see itself." And that was enough. The sun was rising over the quiet town when Officer Jake Martin clipped his badge to his shirt for the very last time. After 9 years in the department, after hundreds of calls, mistakes made, lessons learned, and one moment that changed his life forever, Jake had decided to leave the force. But before he did, he had one more thing to do. His locker was all ready. Empty, his uniform folded neatly in a duffel bag. His radio turned in, his nameplate removed from the door, but one small envelope remained in his hand. Inside was a letter, written not for a boss, not for the chief, not for the public, but for one woman who had changed everything with silence. As Jake stepped outside, Officer Sandra saw him off. "You sure?" she asked gently. Jake nodded. "Yeah, it's time." Sandra smiled, a little sad. "You know, you could have just disappeared. Nobody was pushing you out." Jake looked at her and said, "I couldn't stay after what I did, but I also couldn't leave without telling her what I learned." Sandra didn't ask who. She already knew. Jake drove slowly through town. Passing the mural of Louise Carter on the side of the community center, he paused at a red light and looked. At it, the same words stared back. "You don't need to shout to be heard," Jake whispered under his breath, and sometimes silence is the loudest lesson. He pulled into Louise's driveway and parked. He hadn't been here since the night. He apologized. That night changed him, not because she yelled, not because she punished him, but because she forgave him, and that haunted him more than any courtroom ever could. Louise sat on the porch, just like always, tea beside her, a book in her lap. Calm. Jake stepped out of the truck with the envelope in hand. He didn't go up the stairs. He just stood at the bottom. "Ms. Carter," he said softly. She looked up and smiled. "Hello again?" He raised the envelope. "I wrote something. I didn't know how to say it face to face, so I put it here." Louise didn't reach for it yet. Instead, she said gently, "Then say the first line out loud." Jake blinked. "The first line." She nodded. "Double quotes. If it came from your heart, it should sound right when you speak it." He opened the envelope, pulled out the folded paper, and read aloud, "Dear Mrs. Carter, you changed my life, and I don't think I deserved it." He paused. Louise watched him silently. Jake kept reading, voice slow but honest. "I used to think being a good officer meant following orders. Now I know it means stopping myself before making assumptions. It means listening. It means looking closer. It means being quiet when someone wiser is speaking. That night, I treated you like a suspect, but the truth is you were the only one who acted with dignity. You were my lesson, and I want you to know. I'll never wear another badge unless I've earned the right to stand beside people like you." Jake looked up. Louise was quiet. Still, then she did something that surprised him. She stood slowly, walked down the steps, handed him a small folded note in return. "Open it later," she said. "After sunset." Jake nodded, heart pounding. "Thank you," he said. "For everything," she smiled. "You listened. That's enough for me." Jake turned and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he glanced in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, he liked the man looking back. That evening, after the sun had dipped below the trees, Jake parked on a hill outside town. He stepped out of the truck, sat on the hood, and opened the note from Louise. It read, "Asterisk, asterisk. Some people wear badges. Some people wear wounds. Some people carry regrets. But the bravest people learn. You didn't fail me, Jake. You found yourself. That's the real job." Louise Carter Jake stared at the words, simple, clear, final. He folded the note, placed it in his pocket, and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, he wasn't a cop. He wasn't lost. He was a man who had learned to don that was enough. Back at home, Louise placed Jake's letter in a small wooden box. Inside were other things: a copy of the president's letter, her son's photo in uniform, the medal. And now, this, a reminder that change is possible even in the hearts that caused the hurt. It was a Thursday morning when the first signs went up around town. Flyers taped to lampposts. Postcards slipped into mailboxes. A message on the town's community board. Just 5 simple words. Honor her while she's here. No one needed to ask who it meant. Everyone already knew. Louise Carter had never asked for attention. Had. Never stood on a podium. She had never once said, "Look at me." But somehow, the whole town had looked anyway. What they saw changed them. So this time the people wanted to give back, but not with fanfare. Not with reporters. And not with loud speeches. They wanted to honor her the way she lived quietly, gracefully, truthfully. The mayor met with the city council. Officer Sandra brought a list of ideas, students at East. Maple Elementary sent letters. One read, "She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just stayed calm and changed everything." Another said, "We want to grow up like her, brave but soft." The community came together to plan something simple but unforgettable. They called it the Louise Carter Day of Dignity. It would be held in the town park. No red carpet. No news crews, just a stage, a microphone, and one empty chair with her name on it. On the morning of the event, Louise received a small note slipped under her door. "You taught us how to be better. Now let us thank you for it." She stood on her porch for a long time after reading it. Then, without a word, she walked back inside, put on the same navy blue dress she wore in Washington. The park filled slowly. Children held flowers. Veterans stood in quiet rows. Police officers stood without weapons, just hands over their hearts. James Carter wasn't supposed to be there. He was still overseas. But as the ceremony began, a familiar SUV pulled up quietly. Louise turned. He stepped out. Clean uniform, sharp boots, eyes full of calm pride. "You came," she said. James smiled. "They told me this wasn't just for you. It's for what you represent." At 10 a.m., the mayor stepped up to the mic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't start. With a long speech, she simply said, "In a world that teaches us to shout," one woman reminded us, "that stillness is not weakness. It's that respect must be earned, but dignity should never have to be." Then she gestured to the chair on stage. Double quotes, "Mrs. Carter, would you join us?" Louise stood, helped gently by James, and walked toward the stage. Everyone rose to their feet, not in chaos, but in deep, silent respect. Some people cried. Others simply watched, stunned by the softness in her steps and the storm her presence had calmed as she sat. The mayor continued, "We declare today and every July 10th, after Louise Carter Day in this town, Applause broke out, not wild or loud, but steady, full, and real. A school teacher stepped forward and handed Louise a leather-bound book. It was filled with handwritten notes from children. Teachers, nurses, veterans, and even former officers, all thanking her for being the kind of person the world still needed to believe in. A teenage girl with braids approached the mic next. "I used to think I had to scream to be respected," she said, voice trembling. "But then I watched you. I realized real strength is silent." She looked at Louise and added, "Thank you for giving us an example we can carry forever." James came to the mic last. He didn't wear his sunglasses. He didn't speak like a soldier. He spoke like a son. "My mom doesn't like attention," he began. "But today isn't about attention. It's about reminders." He looked around the crowd. "We're not here because she went viral. We're not here because of a chopper. We're here because she did nothing and made everyone feel something." Then James held up the framed letter from the president and added, "He may be the commander-in-chief, but she's the reason I ever became a man worth saluting." Louise smiled, a tear finally slipping down her cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence said it. All as the crowd slowly left, many came to her one by one. Some gave hugs. Some gave flowers. Some just stood in front of her and nodded. A former officer placed his badge in her hand. "I resigned," he whispered, "but I wanted you to have this." Now she didn't refuse. She just said, "Be better wherever you go." Evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Louise sat once more on her porch. A small girl rode by on her bike and waved. "Happy Carter Day," she shouted. Louise chuckled. From across the street, Sandra waved as she got into her car. Jake's letter still sat in Louise's lap. It was folded neatly. The metal still shone quietly in the light. The world hadn't been loud that day, but it had been full of grace, full of truth, full of the kind of change that doesn't need volume. Because Louise Carter didn't need to fight for her place in the world. She simply stood still and let the world rearrange itself around her dignity. Years passed, the mural faded slightly. The school library filled with new books. The world moved forward. But in one quiet corner of the town, nothing truly changed. Not the White House, not the soft rocking chair, not the woman whose stillness had taught an entire town how to stand taller. Louise Carter grew older. She moved a little slower, sat a little longer, spoke a little softer, but her eyes stayed just as sharp, and the light on her porch, it never went off. Children who once ran past her porch were now grown. They brought their own kids, pointed at the wooden fence and whispered, "That's the porch that taught this town how to listen." The town had changed in ways people couldn't always describe. Police officers now had a new patch on their uniforms. Just below their name tags, it read, "See the person." And every new recruit before being sworn in had to read a short letter. Louise Carter once stood in front of us with nothing but silence. We failed her, and she forgave us. We wear this badge to protect, not to judge. Learn from her. Be better because of her. At East Maple Elementary, the school librarian kept a framed photo near the checkout desk. It showed Louise sitting in the library, a child curled up beside her reading. Beneath it, in bold letters, "Kindness doesn't need volume, just presence." James Carter eventually retired from the military. He didn't buy a mansion, didn't move to a big city. He came home, moved into a small house just down the road, and every morning, before the sun rose, he'd walk over, check on his mother's porch light. It was always on. One evening as summer ended, and the wind grew cooler, James sat beside her on the porch. She was wrapped in a shawl, sipping warm tea, eyes on the stars. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "About what?" he asked. "About how strange it is. I didn't do much, you know." James smiled. "You didn't have to." Louise looked at him, serious now. "I didn't march. I didn't speak in court. Didn't write books." "You didn't need to," James replied. "You were the lesson. Everyone else just took notes." Later, that week, the mayor came to visit. She handed Louise a document, Honorary Historical Citizen, Lifetime Recognition. It was signed by the governor. Louise smiled kindly and said, "You know I didn't do it for this." The mayor nodded. "We know. That's why it matters more." Eventually, time did what it always does. Louise became frailer. Her hands trembled. Her walks became shorter. But her spirit was unshaken. The porch remained her throne. The town remained. Her classroom and that porch light stayed on. Always. Then one soft autumn morning, James walked to her house and found her sleeping peacefully in her chair. Tea still warm. A book open in her lap. The light still glowing behind her. But this time, she didn't wake up. The town grieved gently, not with sirens or headlines, but with porch lights. That night, every house turned on a small light. Some used candles, some used lanterns. Some just flipped a switch. But everywhere you looked, her light lived on. At her funeral, no one wore black suits. People came in simple clothes, children carried flowers, veterans stood in salute, officers bowed their heads, and James. He stood quietly, just like her. When asked if he wanted to speak, he said, "She already said everything," by saying very little. They buried her beneath a tree, just outside town, not far from the school, not far from the station. The stone was plain. It read, "Louise Carter." She didn't shout. She didn't run. She simply stood still and made the world notice. In the years that followed, the town slowly became known for something special. Not its buildings, it's not its economy, but its kindness, its calm, its ability to pause. Before judging, tourists would visit the mural. Teachers would assign essays on her life. And police departments in other cities began calling the local station, asking, "Can we borrow the pause before power training?" They didn't borrow it. They adopted it. And in a quiet way, Louise Carter began to shape town she never even visited. James Carter would still walk to her porch each night. He didn't sit in the chair. He just stood, looked at the light, and whispered, "Still on, Mama. Still on." Because legacies don't always live in parades or statues. Sometimes they live in a porch light. Left on, for those who are still learning to see,